These 13 games were completely dead on arrival, but now they're absolute goats. Starting off at number 13, we have Gotham Knights, a game that should have been an instant hit but instead launched into a storm of disappointment. When Warner Bros. Games announced a co-op open-world Batman game without Batman, fans weren't sure whether to be excited or concerned, but when it hit shelves in 2022, the launch was met with a wave of frustration. The combat felt sluggish, the story lacked impact, and the frame drops made Gotham City feel more like a haunted house than a living, breathing metropolis. Critics and fans alike labeled it a missed opportunity, and for a while it seemed like Gotham Knights was destined to be forgotten. Rather than abandoning the project, Warner Bros. Steadily worked to improve Gotham Knights. Updates enhanced the combat mechanics, optimized performance, and introduced new content that added depth to the experience. As the game evolved, co-op play became more refined, and character builds allowed for greater strategic variety. Players who once dismissed it began to take a second look. Even though it may not rival the Arkham series, it found its own identity and established a dedicated player base.
Access denied. Access.
Next up at number 12 is Rage 2. Now, the first Rage from 2011, it had potential. A post-apocalyptic shooter from ID Software. It sounds like a dream, right? But instead, players got an awkward mix of promising gunplay and an empty world that felt incomplete. When Rage 2 dropped in 2019, fans hoped for a second chance at redemption, but yeah, it wasn't looking good. The story was forgettable, the open world felt barren, and the overall reception was lukewarm at best. Some critics saw it as nothing more than a generic shooter destined to be forgotten. Yet, instead of quietly fading away, Rage 2 found a second win. Through major updates, the game introduced wild new abilities, insane weapons, and much-needed tweaks that gave the combat a chaotic edge unlike anything else. Players started to appreciate it for what it was, a ridiculously fun, over-the-top shooter that didn't take itself too seriously. It may not have rewritten the FPS genre, but Rage 2 gradually regained player interest by refining its mechanics and doubling down on its adrenaline-fueled combat.
Winged it!
Moving on to number 11, Mafia 3 arrives with a redemption arc few anticipated. When it launched in 2016, the hype was real, like who wouldn't want a crime drama set in a gritty 1960s New Orleans-inspired world? But the moment players got their hands on it, the excitement turned to disappointment. The open world felt lifeless, repetitive mission structures drained the fun, and technical issues, oh boy the technical issues, left players frustrated. Many expected a deep, thrilling narrative in the vein of Mafia 2, but instead they got a game that felt unfinished, a victim of rushed development and missed potential. But as time went on, Mafia 3 fought its way back. Post-launch updates resolved the worst bugs, while DLC expansions added much needed variety and new storylines that fleshed out Lincoln Clay's journey. More importantly, time allowed players to appreciate what Mafia 3 did right: the brutal combat, deeply emotional storytelling, and stellar soundtrack that captured the era perfectly. Today, it's recognized as an underrated gem, a game that dared to tell a bold, racially charged narrative in a way few others have. At number 10, Days Gone shows that a rough start doesn't mean a game is doomed forever. When it dropped in 2019, critics didn't just pan it, they practically buried it alive. The reviews slammed its repetitive missions, awkward pacing, and a protagonist that some described as discount Sons of Anarchy. It also didn't help that bugs and frame rate issues made survival in the apocalypse feel more frustrating than immersive. Despite the initial disappointment, developer Bend Studio never stopped believing in their creation, and neither did the players. Slowly but surely, more and more players started talking about it. Gamers who gave Days Gone a second chance discovered a gripping emotional journey with deep survival mechanics and some of the most intense zombie hordes ever seen in gaming. With patches fixing technical issues and PC release bringing in a fresh wave of players, Days Gone transformed from an overlooked letdown into a cult classic. Now, fans are practically begging for a sequel, showing that sometimes a game just needs a little patience to shine. Standing at number 9, The Crew 2, Ubisoft's most ambitious open-world racing game, looked poised to take over the genre. until it actually launched. Unlike traditional racers, it offered boats, planes, and an expansive US map, but players quickly realized that bigger didn't mean better. The world felt empty, progression was clunky, and the driving mechanics, let's just say they weren't winning any awards. To make matters worse, online connectivity issues turned multiplayer races into a frustrating experience. It seemed like a case of Ubisoft overextending its ambition. But here's where the story takes a sharp turn. Ubisoft refused to let The Crew 2 fade away, dropping massive updates that overhauled the driving physics, added new vehicles, and even introduced seasons with fresh content. Suddenly, that massive open world wasn't just a backdrop, it was a playground filled with exciting races and dynamic events. What was once an empty shell became a vibrant, ever-evolving experience. Today, The Crew 2 has carved out its place in the racing genre, standing alongside industry giants. Next up, at number 8 is Battlefield 2042. If you were there on launch day, you remember it was less of a spectacle and more of a catastrophe. Fans were expecting a next-gen Battlefield experience, but what they got was a glitchy, unfinished mess that felt more like an expensive beta test. Missing core features, laughably bad AI, and a specialist system that nobody asked for had longtime fans shaking their heads. For many, Battlefield 2042 wasn't just disappointing, it was the end of the franchise as they knew it. Fast forward to now, and it's a completely different story. DICE doubled down, rolling out massive updates that brought back the traditional class setup, improved gunplay, and completely overhauled the maps. They even added long-requested features like a proper scoreboard and voice chat. Yes, that was missing at launch. The game, once abandoned by its own community, has fought its way back into the spotlight. It's still not perfect, but Battlefield 2042 went from an unplayable disaster to a genuinely solid shooter that keeps players coming back.
Boba, get them! Race you!
At number 7, we have Genshin Impact, a game that initially launched under a storm of controversy. Back in 2020, the first look at Genshin had gamers fuming. Many dismissed it as a blatant ripoff of The Legend of Zelda. Critics scoffed at its free-to-play model, assuming it would be a cash grab designed to drain wallets rather than offer a meaningful experience. And let's not forget the infamous PS4 explosion issue. Early players reported horrendous lag crashes and performance drops that made even the most die-hard fans consider quitting before they got started. But then everything changed. Genshin Impact became a global sensation. It wasn't just a Zelda clone. It was an RPG juggernaut packed with jaw-dropping world building, surprisingly deep lore, and an addicting gacha system that kept players invested. MiHoYo, the studio behind the game, consistently rolled out updates expanding the world with new regions, intricate storylines, and fan-favorite characters. What once seemed like a passing fad is now a cultural phenomenon, drawing in millions of players and redefining what a live service RPG can be. Coming in strong at number 6 is Fortnite. Hard to believe, right? But before it became the cultural juggernaut we know today, Fortnite was a completely different game. Originally, it launched in 2017 as a co-op survival game called Fortnite Save the World. It had some interesting ideas, base building, zombie defense, but no one really cared. The excitement just wasn't there. And with competitors like PUBG dominating the battle royale scene, it looked like Fortnite was about to become another forgettable experiment. Then Epic Games pulled off a bold move that changed everything. They introduced Fortnite Battle Royale as a free-to-play mode, and overnight it blew up into a worldwide phenomenon. The colorful visuals, accessible gameplay, and the now iconic building mechanics made it an instant sensation. Streamers latched onto it, esports followed, and the rest is history. With constant updates, massive crossovers, and a community-driven approach, Fortnite didn't just revive itself, it reshaped the entire gaming industry. Breaking into the top 5, we got Rocket League, a game about rocket-powered cars playing soccer. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, when Rocket League launched in 2015, many gamers didn't just think it was ridiculous, they ignored it completely. Despite its predecessor, supersonic, acrobatic, rocket-powered battle cars, yes, that was a real title, being an obscure flop, Psyonix gave it another shot. Unfortunately, the initial reception wasn't much better. The core idea was fun, sure, but hardly anyone was playing, plus the lack of marketing meant meant most gamers had no clue it even existed, and those who did thought it was just a gimmick. Then came the unexpected power move of PlayStation Plus. By making the game free for PS Plus subscribers, Rocket League suddenly had the exposure it desperately needed. The word spread like wildfire, streamers picked it up, and before long it was everywhere. Psyonix capitalized on the momentum, rolling out esports tournaments, new game modes, and an ever-growing roster of insane car designs. Now, it's not just a cult classic, it's a full-fledged gaming phenomenon, pulling in millions of players and proving that sometimes all a great game needs is a second chance. Landing at 4th position is Resident Evil 7, a game that not only resurrected itself but also revived an entire franchise. By the time Resident Evil 6 wrapped up, the series had lost its way. It had traded its survival horror roots for over-the-top action, and longtime fans weren't having it. So when Resident Evil 7 was announced, expectations were mixed. Then it launched, and for a brief moment it looked like Capcom had made a huge mistake. See, this wasn't the Resident Evil fans remembered. Gone were the familiar characters replaced with a first-person perspective and a brand new setting. It felt like an entirely different game, and many players were skeptical. However, as players got their hands on the game, it became clear Resident Evil 7 wasn't just scary, it was terrifying in all the right ways. The eerie atmosphere, the slow burn tension, and the masterfully crafted enemies made it one of the scariest games in years. As more players discovered it, so did the praise. Initially seen as a risky gamble, Resident Evil 7 defied expectations and pulled off one of Capcom's most impressive turnarounds, firmly re-establishing the franchise as the gold standard of survival horror.
Now what, mister?
Taking the 3rd spot is Red Dead Redemption. Yes, the first one, not the sequel that had everyone crying over Arthur Morgan. This game now stands as one of the greatest open world adventures of all time. But at launch, let's just say things weren't looking too bright for Rockstar's Western epic. When it dropped in 2010, Red Dead Redemption faced doubt and uncertainty, especially after the lukewarm reception of Red Dead Revolver. Western games weren't exactly mainstream, and some players weren't convinced a slow-paced, character-driven cowboy adventure would hold their attention. On top of that, technical issues plagued early copies, NPCs behaving bizarrely, horses glitching into oblivion, and occasional game-breaking bugs threatened to ruin the immersion. However, Rockstar did what they do best. They patched the problems and refined the experience. As more people gave it a chance, the game's depth became undeniable and its reputation grew stronger. At first, it struggled to capture mainstream attention, but over time, its immersive world and rich storytelling convinced players that it was more than just another Western adventure. It didn't just revive interest in Western games, it set a new standard for open world narratives. And when Red Dead Redemption 2 came around, it only solidified its place among the gaming greats. Runner up at number 2, we've got Minecraft. Surprisingly, the global phenomenon that redefined sandbox gaming was once considered a niche, unpolished indie project. Back in 2009, when Marcus Notch Persson first released the alpha version, it was nothing more than a pixelated playground with no real objectives, story, or even proper graphics. Many dismissed it as a low-effort passion project lacking direction. Big gaming publications barely paid it any attention, and players who tried it weren't sure what to make of a game that dropped them into an empty world with no tutorials or guidance. But as players experimented, they realized the game wasn't about following a set path, it was about shaping their own experiences. Instead of seeing it as an incomplete game, they saw an opportunity to build, explore, and craft their own stories. As more players shared their experiences, the game's reputation soared, driven by organic excitement rather than traditional marketing. YouTube videos fueled the hype, and by the time Mojang officially released the full game in 2011, Minecraft was unstoppable. It became a sandbox giant, breaking records, inspiring countless spin-offs, and even being used in schools. Today, with its infinite creativity and thriving modding community, Minecraft isn't just a game, it's a cultural revolution. And finally, claiming the top spot at number 1 is Baldur's Gate 3. You wouldn't believe it now, but when this game first launched in early access, it wasn't exactly the masterpiece people hail it as today. Technical issues, check. Unfinished features, absolutely. Fans of the legendary Baldur's Gate series had been waiting for decades only to get a game that felt more like a promising work in progress than a true successor. Clunky UI, missing mechanics, and a lack of content made it feel underwhelming. Some players enjoyed what was there, but for many, it didn't didn't seem like it would live up to its potential. Fast forward to 2023, and Baldur's Gate 3 didn't just improve, it completely shattered expectations. Larian Studios took the time to refine everything: cinematic dialogue, deep character interactions, and a combat system that made every encounter feel meaningful. With an unprecedented level of player choice and immersive storytelling, it became the gold standard for RPGs, earning Game of the Year and proving that patience truly pays off.